Today we're going to take a look at the first one of the Psalms that's been part of this Bible study series, Psalm 104. And I'll start off with telling you why I chose this psalm to look at. And that's because, first of all, when I opened the Bible, here it was. And second of all, when I looked at this section, I noticed something about the Spirit. And I've been thinking a lot about the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, this source of life for those who are children of God. And this helps us to understand a little bit about what the Spirit would mean to perhaps one of Jesus' early Jewish followers, because they all knew these Psalms. And so when he talks about Spirit, they would have understood the Spirit perhaps in this way. We're looking at a section here, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you've made them all, talking about all the creatures, those in the sea, the ones that God gives the food to. And it comes to this verse 29, when you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. When you send forth your Spirit, and you can see the translators note they use the word spirit instead of breath. They are created, and you renew the face of the ground. In other words, the Spirit is this source of life for all of these created works of God. And if we go back again to my favorite book of the Bible, probably my favorite, I'm always here, Genesis 1, verse 2. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So that's the first place we see spirit or breath. The second place we see spirit or breath, I think, is right here when talking about the animals. Nope, that will be later on when talking about the animals with Noah. So the second time we see this Spirit of God, this breath, is right here. We're in Genesis chapter 2 on the creation of humankind. God breathed. So the breath of God is what causes man to become a living creature. And that's kind of reflected here. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created. The breath of God is the source of life. But Psalms aren't necessarily meant to be analyzed this way. When I take a look at a psalm, I usually just like to read through it, because psalms are songs, and you really don't understand a song on the basis of a single verse or a snippet of the text. You have to really get the whole thing, because a song is about the emotion, the feeling, the spirit that's experienced when everybody is singing this together. And for a lot of the Jewish people, these psalms would be things that they sang on their way to Jerusalem as part of celebrations and feasts. This one is particularly happy. Bless the Lord, O my soul, is this refrain. This is a huge psalm of praise to God. Bless the Lord, O my soul. It opens and closes with that. So we can kind of tell what the focus is that the soul of man will be to bless the Lord. And the word it uses for the Lord here is the proper name of God, which is Jehovah. This is not like a general God Almighty or the gods, and a reference to that which is God, but this is a reference to the voice that spoke to Moses, the cloud, the shining light that led the people of Israel through the desert. So this is the being with whom the Israelites have a personal connection and relationship. So when it says, O Lord, my God, you have those two different concepts there all together. You are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. And again, thinking about tents, there are two very significant tents in Israelite history. The first one is the tabernacle erected by Moses, and the second one is the tent that David set up in Jerusalem. And just a little quick side note, it's kind of an interesting, this is definitely a side note, but I learned this, or remembered it yesterday, and was very excited. If you look at the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is a covenant that the people are making with God. This is a written covenant. The people accept it, and when the people get into the promised land, you have this story in the book of Joshua where there's this ratification of the covenant right here. Deuteronomy 32 tells the people what they need to do. Oh, not that one. It's a different It's a different point where it says they're supposed to go up to the mountain, and half the people stand on one side, and half the people stand on the other side. You know what, maybe I can't find it right now. Sometimes these things are difficult. Anyway, the book of Deuteronomy is a covenant that Israel makes with God, who is then the leader of the people. And then in the book of 1 Samuel, we see that the people no longer want God to be the ruler. And the Lord comes to Samuel and says, do not be sad, because they're not rejecting you. Samuel was the prophet representing God. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me from being king. And so in some respects, the covenant comes to an end in the days of Samuel. I don't think it all comes to an end. Here's where Israel is asking Samuel for a king. Samuel warns against a king, and God comes and he says, obey their voice and make them a king. And here's they have rejected me from being king over them. This is the book of Samuel. So you have this transition from the Mosaic covenant outlined in the book of Deuteronomy, where God is the leader of the people, and the covenant is administered through the priestly system, to here you have Samuel following the days of the judges, who is a prophet, and the people are asking him to make them a king, and God says, well, they have rejected me from being king over them. So in some ways, there's this legal process that is adjusted in the days of Samuel. And then David follows this up, David is just in love with this God of Israel, and I have no idea where to look here. But after he's king, he wants to build a house for God. That's not even in 1 Samuel, it's in 2 Samuel. And God says, no, you can't build me a house. You've killed too many people. However, your son will build me a house. At the same time, David brings the ark to Jerusalem. He kind of messes up the first time with the story of Uzzah, but he eventually does get it to Jerusalem, and he builds a tent. And the Ark of the Covenant lived in the tent, and that was where a lot of these psalms are composed. David composed the psalms. You'll see here in this section, we're in the fourth section of the Psalms. A lot of these are psalms of David. Some of them are not identified, and some of them, I think I just saw one earlier today that was a prayer of Moses, the man of God. So that's what opens the fourth book of the Psalms that the people would have been singing out of. So when people are singing, you are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent, they're probably thinking of the dwelling places of God. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. So much symbolism here in these things. That's why these psalms are so beautiful. But the lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. We have this story that goes all throughout the Bible that the earth is formed out of water. In other words, the earth is the dwelling place of God. He makes the clouds his chariot, which is comparing God to Baal, which was the most common god that was worshipped by the Canaanites. And in most of that surrounding area, Baal was the god of thunder. And the god of thunder made the clouds his chariot, rode on the wings of the wind, and you see that not even Baal, this god of the other people, can be equal to Jehovah, the one who this psalm is written to. He set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. Interesting now. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. See this transition in pronouns? At your rebuke, they fled. You did all of these things, you. And then here we get, he made the moon. You make darkness. What is this difference between the pronouns? That's something curious. Let's see what emerges here. But what I noticed is that we're talking about the earth on its foundations, covering it with deep as with a garment. Remember, covering yourself with light as with a garment. So God is clothed in light. The earth is clothed with the deep. And if we remember the deep, coming back to Genesis again, the first place we see the darkness was upon the face of the deep. The earth was clothed with the deep. So here you have these people definitely know not only the book of Genesis, the Torah, but also there is this tradition that's coming all the way up to thousands of years later, even hundreds of years after Moses is writing. You have these things. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The waters stood above the mountains. I wonder if this is referring to the flood in the days of Noah, right? Covered with the deep again, as with the garment. But also, like, even though the earth was destroyed in the days of Noah, you have this notion that the earth is on its foundation and will not be moved. Interesting. I've been listening to some people lately who are talking about the earth being tilted off its axis or having been moved, and that causing all kinds of problems and chaos in the world. And potentially, this is what happened. Some people propose that perhaps there was a comet that struck the earth in the days of Noah, and that was what caused the flood. All that aside, at your rebuke they fled, the sound of your thunder they took to flight. So there's something about the deep that responds to the voice of God. And you have this again in the days of Jesus when he's rebuking the waves, and the waves are suddenly at peace. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. That really sounds to me like the promise that God made to Noah at the end of the flood. Never again will they cover the earth, the boundary. And we still have the mark of that boundary today. Let's just take a quick peek. I love how everything in this book is connected. It's fascinating to me that hundreds and thousands of years pass and there is a consistency in this story of the human relationship to God, the story of the people of Israel, the Jewish nation that continues even to this day, this bloodline. It's fascinating just the gift and the blessing that they carry. So here we have God is establishing a covenant. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So the boundary is set in place. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. That includes us. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And this is pretty much repeating the same thing. This is not going to happen. The boundary has been set. They will not again cover the earth. But still we're talking personal. So the psalm opens, we are talking to each other about he, Jehovah. But then right here, it turns personal. You did all of this stuff. You flooded the earth. You set a boundary that it won't happen again. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. So here we're beginning to talk about the work of God, and by 24 we have this expression, O Lord, how manifold are your works. And here we're beginning this talking about the fruit of your work is a blessing to all of the creatures. This is not just about humanity. And again, we saw this with the covenant made with Noah. It was between God, between Noah, and between all living things. The earth is not left out of this relationship between God and humanity. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man. If there's any teetotalers, take a look at this. 15. Oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. I think this sounds like a good life right here. You have livestock, plants, wine, oil, and bread. It sounds like just this delicious life full of good food, hard work, and beautiful things growing. Continues on talking about the trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. So we're switching it back from personal to talking about him. He planted the trees. And the cedars of Lebanon, if we think of that, we should probably think of something like the redwoods in California today. These things were huge, they were absolutely incredible, and cedar trees are already beautiful by themselves. But God is the one who takes care of the trees. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has her home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the rock badgers. He made the moon to mark the seasons. Interesting there now. There's a marker of seasons that the moon does. We live in this world where we're so disconnected from the moon. Ever since the days of Pope Gregory, I believe, somewhere in the medieval times, we've been on the sun calendar. We've measured time mostly in terms of years. Our months don't necessarily line up with the moon, and yet the moon has its cycles from great to small. And it has a purpose to mark the seasons. How many of us study the moon to understand its purpose, to understand the seasons that it marks? The sun knows it's time for setting. And here we switch back. We're again talking directly to God. We have both of these times we switch over to this direct address. It has to do with things that may not necessarily be nice. Darkness, it's night, all the beasts of the forest creep about. I slept in the forest last night, it's not nice to hear them creeping about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until the evening. And then over here we have the earth being covered with the deep. So God is doing these things, even these things that are difficult for mankind. So we're praising God in the third person. He does all of these wonderful things. And then we turn to the second person. We're addressing God. You did this, and you take care of all of these things, and you provide this. And then we begin to talk about what God does for other things. And then you have set this up, and this seems to be like a daily cycle of light and darkness, where the beasts come out at night, man goes out to his work in the day. And following that, we have the exclamation. You notice, if you look at this, we have this psalms are structured in terms of poetry, right? And the punctuation in poetry is significant. This is where we have the exclamation point. This is the center, this is the focal piece of this psalm. We're blessing the Lord. The Lord is very great. How manifold are your works. Let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. These are the things that are emphasized. Also this, that God is great. In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here's the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable. Living things both small and great. There go the ships, and Leviathan, whom you formed to play in it. The great sea serpent playing in the deep. So we have these things that God is doing, which are so far beyond the capacity of man. I think this is why works is such a significant thing, because when we look at what God does, when he covers the entire earth, when he grows grass for the livestock, when he makes a place for the rock badgers, humans don't do any of that. We're fairly well occupied growing food to eat and all of the rest of things that modern society occupies us with. These all look to you. These all look to you to give them food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open their hand, they are filled with your hand. They are filled with good things, including us. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. So there's a couple things here. The sending forth of the Spirit is the creation of life. When we look around us and we see life in the world, what are we looking at? We're looking at evidence of the Spirit at work, of this life force, of this Spirit that we saw all the way back in the beginning of Genesis. It is present, it is alive, it is taking form, it is taking shape. It is a revelation to us of the mystery of God. And you renew the face of the ground. When we think about face, we think about identity. We often recognize people by their face. And the ground has a face. In other words, it has an identity. It has an expression. It has, in a sense, a personality, a being, its own life. And part of renewing the ground, the face of the ground, has to do with the creatures that come forth from it. And just another quick review, always turning back to Genesis, but when God creates the beasts of the field, he said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind." And so the earth is what brings these things forth. The spirit enters the earth, brings forth life. I'm not going to get distracted. I want to go and talk about polarity and masculinity and femininity, but that will be for another day, because this is it's another theme that we see throughout, and here's just one of those places where we have the spirit entering earth, bringing forth life. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. Who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. And this is here a direct reference to Exodus chapter 21, I believe, when Israel comes to Mount Sinai. Well, actually, no, chapter 19. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke, the whole mountain trembled greatly. So we're seeing the greatness of God, so much so that the mountains smoke, but yet we're also seeing the goodness of God in caring for all things. Now here we're back to third person. We're no longer talking directly to God. We're singing to each other now. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. Who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing my praise to my God while I have being. May my meditation be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord. And this is the meditation. This entire song here is a meditation on God and how he is revealed in the earth, the way that we see God, the way that we know God through his works. Again, this focal point of the psalm. How manifold are your works? There is so much diversity in things that God does. These things recorded all through the Bible and in other places throughout human history, and every day in your front yard and out in the forest and in the hearts of people. Let sinners be consumed from the earth and let the wicked be no more. Here we have kind of a sudden twist here. But if we're looking at going back here, if this is a reference to the flood in the days of Noah, which it seems to be, that was for sinners to be consumed from the earth. So we're still saying, yes, Lord, like this is all this beautiful stuff. God, you are powerful. Let me be pleasing to you, and let sinners be consumed from the earth. Let the wicked be no more. Let those who do not want to be in relationship with God, those who do not want to align with the goodness, with the truth, with the beauty, with all of these things that God does, let them be no more. But again, quite an invocation to come at the end of this whole grandiose thing is like, let's get rid of the sinners. And also thank God that we live after the days of Jesus, because the message we have now is so different. Finally then, the closing thought, bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. One last thought on this. Bless the Lord, O my soul. See this? Bless the Lord, bless the Lord, bless the Lord, O my soul. You have this psalm here. This is the Psalm of David 103, which comes before 104. It is possible that David wrote Psalm 103, and then somebody said, hey, let's see if we can make another song that's designed off of this psalm. And this is where sometimes these notes in the bottom of the Bible, this study Bible here, can be quite interesting. Because what these people recognize is that there was actually a song written by the Pharaoh who was bringing monotheism to Egypt, and that there is quite a close parallel between these two songs. So there is a chance that whoever wrote this song, Bless the Lord, O my soul, was perhaps inspired both by David as well as by the songwriters of Egypt, thinking that perhaps God likes to be worshipped with all kinds of music.